Hey guys, Troy and Gil here, back with another tier list video. You guys liked the one we did before of the NBA All-Star Game, so definitely go check that out if you're curious what we thought of ranking those guys as investments. But today we're going to be doing the Rising Stars game slash challenge. I'm not sure the official name, but we're going to be ranking those guys. We're doing just Team USA to keep the video a little shorter, but also because if we're being honest, we were just talking before, like we're not going to rank Michael Mulder as a sports card investment. You know, the Team World team kind of drops off, but pretty much every single guy on the Team USA team is actually a pretty big name. So we're going to get into it. Disclaimers as always. Once again, I think especially with these young guys, it gets personal. I understand, but this is in how we would rank them for investing. So, for instance, if you look at the roster right away, I don't know, maybe off the top of my head, Ja Morant might be the most talented player on that team, or Zion. That doesn't mean they're going to be at the absolute top tier. So it's all relative, their prices and everything, and it's also what we think investing in them with a focus on this year, but also long term, what we think. So with that being said, Gil, are you ready?
Let's get to it. Let's get to it.
All right. So we're going to pull this up. Boom. Tier list. And if we see right there, the first person we're going to start with, speak of him, Ja Morant. What do you think about this guy?
Oh, man. Ja Morant, reigning rookie of the year. He's having a really good year. I think he's kind of getting to the point, at least I don't know if it's reflected in the market right now, but it feels like we're not talking about him enough and what he's doing.
Yeah, it is reflected in the market.
So, I feel like he's missed some time. And I think based on that, I think it would be a good investment just because he's still consistently performing well, and eventually he's going to get more notoriety for it, especially because the Grizzlies are right there in the playoff hunt. They have a lot of games in the second half of the season, but wouldn't be surprised if he's like on the playoff stage having that kind of performance that we talked about, like the way Luka did in his playoff debut, even if it's in the play-in game, because they were in the play-in last year. So Ja's going to be in the spotlight this year for sure.
So you do think actually the Grizzlies have a chance to be in that play-in or playoff scenario? Because I know they started off pretty slow, but they've done better lately.
Yeah, I do think so. I know Ja had an ankle injury. He missed some time. They had some COVID issues with the team. And Jaren Jackson Jr. hasn't even played yet this year. So if he is back in the lineup in the second half of the season, I think the Grizzlies, they're right at 500 right now and like round the outside looking in. So I can see them hanging around.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? You saying that, and also looking, just, skipping ahead a little bit, the rest of the guys on this list, he might actually have the opportunity to have one of the biggest playoff successes out of this guy, out of these guys here. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
The rest of them probably not as much. And also going long term, considering, like you mentioned, hey, you're learning. The kid is learning. His market price right now is a little, I guess, depressed would be the word, considering how talented of a player he is. Mm-hmm. So right off the bat, for me, I got to put Ja Morant S, because one of the things I also always talk about is to really hold that long-term value, you have to be a potential number one on a winning, if not championship team. And he has a long way to go, but I think Ja Morant has that potential. We've seen it. Sure. So I'm a big believer in him.
For sure. And one more thing on him before we move on, like with him being number one, that team being so young, they're building around him to make him shine as the number one. Yep. So not only will he be the number one, he's going to look really good doing it. So I'm all for that.
Next one. We have one that's close to home. If you guys don't know, I mentioned it in the last video, but Gil is a writer for NBA.com and a lot of focus on the Raptors, but also a Charlotte kid. So a lot of focus on the Hornets. So this is your guy, Lamelo Ball. This is going to be a tough one. So I will say right off the bat, he is very expensive.
Yeah.
He is very expensive. You can know that without even being fully in the card market. But what do you think about Lamelo Ball?
I think he's awesome. I think I am a little surprised by how well he's done, but not completely surprised. I knew he could play. He played really well, or he's been a pro for years now. But for him to do it at the level he's doing it, hands down, going to be the rookie of the year this year. It's his title to lose. So obviously he's got that going for him. I think the other thing to just keep an eye on is how far will this Hornets team go? Like right now, they're kind of in the same area as the Grizzlies. There's that logjam in the Eastern Conference. Will he be able to have that playoff moment? I'm curious to see, but just short term, that's what I feel like. But I think long term, LaMelo is going to be the guy in Charlotte. He's going to be a huge star. We talked about just from his notoriety and how he's been famous. We've known who he is since he was 12 or 13 years old. He's backing it up with his play. And all on top of all of that, like he's just a big name, and like this market has needed a big star. So from that and thinking about like who sells jerseys, like he checks all those boxes.
He does 100%. The only bad news is, as we both mentioned before, people know that. So he is very expensive. Also the tough thing is to what's going on in the card market right now is unlike anything before. So it's not only the fact that he's LaMelo Ball, but also how many people are opening packs right now and are involved in the card market. Like LaMelo might even be, it's hard to draw direct comparisons, but I'll just say his hoops card is probably more expensive than Zion's when he came out. So that's the tough thing. I think I still have to put him in A though, just because like you said, almost to be honest, I think if you take into account the marketing and all that kind of stuff, he could have the highest potential. Like you said, selling jerseys out of anyone on here. I mean, Zion maybe, but I would put him over Ja in terms of just pure marketability potential.
Yeah, I mean, when I watch, LaMelo's interviews on a local broadcast here, because like you said, based in Charlotte, he's charismatic. He's having fun. He's again in another situation where the team is an interesting blend of young and older talent, but they're going to build around him because he's that good. You could argue that he's probably the most talented player arguably the most talented player on this list of guys. I mean, obviously you have Zion and Ja, but just from a talent perspective, like his talent is through the roof. So there's really no telling how good he can get, and I think he's earned that level of respect already with one half of season of play.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard for me even doing this. I'm sure we might even, hey, in the comments, let us know what you think, because his prices are absurd, but I feel like it's disrespectful to put him in B just because of his talent. You know what I mean? Yeah. All these guys are a gamble to an extent. So if I'm going to gamble on a guy, I'll just go with LaMelo and see what happens. Absolutely. Next one, a really talented rookie, Tyrese Halliburton. And I'm going to be honest on this one. Believe it or not, I'll be the person who actually admits this. I have not watched a ton of Kings games this year. So I've seen a little bit of, well, that's why I'm saying I'm the one who's willing to admit that. But I've seen flashes and he's really good, but I just don't have a full comprehension of actually how good he is.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. Leading up to the draft, there were a lot of conversations about, a lot of teams are going to regret passing him up. And I think the question was how well he played in college going to translate to the league? And it is. And I think there's also the Sacramento factor where people think that, guys go to Sacramento and just never become who they're destined to be. Yeah. But I think he's kind of a part of a new wave along the side of De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield of kind of breaking that mold and bringing some excitement back to them. There's some issues with the team, but I think he's really been playing super well. And honestly, any other year, it would be a stronger race between he and LaMelo Ball for, rookie of the year. So I do think Tyrese Halliburton has a lot of potential, especially just as a two-way player. His shot looks a little funky, but it goes in. So, you can't really complain about that either. And I think a factor with him is, again, like he's very personable. He's very outward with his personality. He's big in the top shot. So I'm sure if, that has, even if it's a negligible difference, I do think him just being otherwise, a guy who goes to Sacramento as a rookie, we probably wouldn't know that much about him, but him being on podcasts with JJ Redick and things of that nature will make him a more known player that people might be checking for him more often than they would any other outstanding rookie from Sacramento.
Here, and you're right on all that 100%. The one concern I have with Halliburton, and I honestly don't know, is the thing I talked about earlier. Is he a number one? And maybe it's too early to say that, but I don't know. I guess that's my worry for him going forward.
Yeah, and I don't think so. But I don't think I don't think he'll be looked to be. I think it's clear that De'Aaron Fox is that franchise guy. So I think it could be. I mean, obviously not the Splash Brothers, but like that type of dynamic where there's a clear this is the guy, but he's not him without him. And I think he will definitely be a heck of a 1-2 punch, but he's definitely not the guy.
Yeah, and for that reason, Gil, we're gonna have to put him in B.
That's fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah, we'll see what happens going forward. A lot of people, once again, it's hard to say their exact prices right now for the rookies because there's a lot of different factors going on where products are new and certain things haven't come out yet, so it's hard to kind of accurately price him. But I think he's actually pretty expensive considering the fact that, the jury is out on him whether he can develop into that number one option. But we'll see. Next one, James Wiseman. Now, here's a guy I actually have watched a lot of, and I've been surprised even on Warriors Reddit. Like, there are a lot of people down on Wiseman right now and saying we already made a mistake drafting him. I was surprised to see that.
Yeah, it's tough these days with big men. I feel like I think we hear similar criticisms of DeAndre Ayton, who was the number one pick a few years ago, and now here's the number two pick from this year. I think that with time, him being with a team that he's now on the same timeline as is going to do wonders for him moving forward. And I think you just don't necessarily see it right away. But I think he's had flashes this year, and I think it helps him, again, not being on the same timeline as his team. But I can see James Wiseman, if things go shake well for the Warriors, being the reason that they win a playoff game. Like, it's not necessarily like he has a signature playoff performance. He's not going for 25 and 15 in the playoffs, but I could see them, as a 6, 7, 8 seed stealing one on the road because James Wiseman, has a big fourth quarter or it gets a big offensive rebound. So that's where I see him right now. I can see him having like a huge burst, in late in year 2 or in year 3 in his career. But right now, I think it's going to be a lot of frustration just with where he is and how he's just on a different timeline. And it's a learning experience. We've seen like Draymond Green tell him, look for the ball, stuff like that. So I think he's learning and figuring things out, but I think he's super talented and he's shown that enough for me to believe that.
Yeah. I don't know. This is a tough one for me. I think he has that potential. He's a winning basketball player. Yeah, that's the one thing. And you compared him to Ayton a little bit, which I think Ayton is a great player. But for me personally, I don't see as much how he fits into a championship team. I think we already see it with Wiseman. Like you said, well, we might even see it this year. So that's why I am a believer in him, even though he struggles, because his skill set and his potential is so special. But like you said, bigs always take a while. He's another guy who's fairly expensive right now. I think maybe with his struggles, he might come down a little bit. And it's tough. I'm in between B and A because I think throwing him into C would just not be the case. Yeah. But if I just think about it, who would I rather have? If a stock in Wiseman or Halliburton? For me, it's Wiseman. What about you?
No, I agree. And I think that goes to the fact of just like being in that Golden State situation, a winning player in a franchise with a culture of winning versus a winning player of a franchise who doesn't necessarily have a culture of winning in the past 15, 20 years. So from that perspective, I look at it that way. And then I think he'll increasingly be marketable, over time. I feel like he just signed with a Chinese shoe brand. He speaks Mandarin. So like, that's like, I feel like that affects things. Like, I think he'll be internationally popular, and I think that will help him moving forward, especially if Golden State can get back to be, towards the top half of the West as he gets his career off the ground.
All jokes aside, him speaking Chinese put it over the edge for me. We're going to throw him in A.
Boom. There you go.
Done. Next one. Speaking of boom and dunks, Anthony Edwards ending. Who was that? That was my man Watanabe, right? That was your team. Yeah. Or Raptors. I respect them for going for it though. Anthony Edwards, highlight reel player, number 1 overall pick. I feel like people forget that. That's crazy. What do you think of him?
I think he's super talented. I feel like I've said this about everybody. This U.S. team is stacked. So I'll probably that's Captain Obvious here. He's super talented. He's in a weird situation right now. There's just so many guards. It's him, Rubio, D'Angelo Russell, and Malik Beasley. Like, that's going on. But I do think and realize that whatever Minnesota plans on doing moving forward, he's going to be a big part of the plans. He's 19 years old. He's, again, shown a lot of flashes. Athleticism out of this world, and also like a character. He's a pretty funny guy if you've ever seen any of his interviews. I think it's going to be some time before we like see, oh, this is why Minnesota took him number 1. We see it in flashes, but I can see him I in the big picture. I don't think it's like an MVP, but like a 25 point per game scorer. Yeah, I can see him being that guy for sure. But as far as just, how excited are we going to be about somebody in Minnesota that's not named Kevin Garnett? Like, it took KG being an MVP for us to really, like, be interested in checking for the Timberwolves like that. So that would be a concern. But I do think Minnesota is interesting, and they're just not very good this year too. So he's probably of all these guys, he's on the worst team, I would think, right?
Yeah, that's probably true. I guess my issue with him is, like, you see the guys in S and A, like, John Morant, Lamelo Ball, and Zion are all that guy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like those are legit. And then Wiseman has the Warriors factor. With what you mentioned, Edwards being in Minnesota, for me, I'm not sold on him being like that guy. And we're really going to tune in for him, even though he's in Minnesota. So for that reason, I feel like I have to put him. Wow. Do we have our first C? I mean, I guess that kind of shows. No, I can't. I think it's too early to throw him in. Well, actually, you know what? This is our list. I'm putting him in C. And that's definitely up for debate. But just like I said before, would I rather have Wiseman or Halliburton? I would rather have Wiseman. He's an A.
Yeah.
I might even Halliburton. I don't know. I'm just, for me personally, I'm not rushing out to buy any Anthony Edwards cards right now. And maybe that's a mistake. And I'm not pretending like that's the most informed opinion in the world, but that's just how I feel right now.
That's fair. And also, I feel like I disrespect another Minnesota legend. I didn't mention Kevin Love, but that's another guy who, like, when Kevin Love was in Minnesota, we weren't checking for him until he was in Cleveland, which is crazy to think, but he was on a championship team. Like, I could see Anthony Edwards starting to put up numbers, but Minnesota just year in, year out being bad and some changes happening. And I think it will be some time before we see him on a good team. So because of that, it's almost like an afterthought that he was a number one pick. So for that reason, and then that's like no disrespect to him. It's just more of a commentary on where he's at with his team. Because I think, and he's being so young, maybe when he's 22, 23, we'll be like, oh yeah, that's why he was number one pick. But right now it's just like LaMelo's the guy with all the shine and James Wiseman's the guy with the, the cachet because of who he's playing for.
And also another number one pick, Wiggins, who put up big numbers in Minnesota. And like, that's a different story. He's got like some major defensive and like seems like mental issues. And Anthony Edwards is a way different player, but that's just something to consider for people who are watching this. Just because he's scoring, let's call it 20 points per game in Minnesota, that's not necessarily enough for his prices to even hold as a number one pick, what they're going to be in this kind of year.
For a point of reference, what are Cat prices looking like right now?
Crazy cheap, I think, and that's something not to take it too off the rails, but I think if he moves, that's someone me and my friends have actually been looking to buy, because if he moves to a better situation,
so there you go. That's number one pick, big numbers, arguably. I mean, like 2 years ago we were like, who's the best big man in the league? Is it Cat? Is it Jokic? Is it Embiid? And like being in Minnesota's kind of held him back, and there it is. So
that's the thing. And these guys have time because they're so young, so we don't really sour on them that quickly compared to someone like Cat, who we've seen for a while. But people, if the short-term aspect is there, but long-term, as I kind of mentioned, if you're going to be even if you're the number one on a bad team, you have to be like that guy where people are talking about like, okay, like I said, John Morant, we already see, we think we could build a winning team around you. Or a Luka to take it really far. So we'll see. Okay, next one. Tyler Herro. This is going to be a controversial one, even for me, because I have a lot of Tyler Herro. And especially after what happened last year. I'm curious to see your take on this guy.
I feel like he's in a great we go from talking about a guy who's not in a good situation to a guy who's in a great situation. I think he, being a young guy, like we saw last year in the bubble, like it's kind of like they need, a certain amount from him, but then he just has the type of game and type of role where he can just explode for 36 points in the conference finals or whenever he did it, or semis, whatever he did it, whenever he had that huge game. And with the Heat, really gaining traction lately and looking like they're going to be a pain in the postseason again, I think there's not that much pressure on him to perform right now because he is the third guy on that team. It's Jimmy and Bam, and then it's him. So he's not the guy, but it's like they're kind of training him to be that guy because, Jimmy's not. I think it's just going to be like a passing of the torch, very like symbolically over time, because like Bam is going to be the guy soon, but like how much of the guy can you be as like a two-way big man that'll probably cap out at 22 points per game that does everything, but Tyler Herro can be that guy who can do big things for a Heat team. But I don't know if that team success-wise peaked last year, but I know Herro has great potential, and he's going to be moving up the totem pole in Miami soon enough.
Yeah. The thing about Herro that I'm kind of concerned with is I'm not sure he can repeat what he did in the playoffs last year,
Yeah,
this year. If you're
yeah,
buying him now, his prices have come down a ton since
yeah,
the bubble last year. You're basically counting on him having another big moment in the playoffs, because if he doesn't, or even if it's just like a small one, his prices will go down a lot. He'll kind of be, I don't want to say forgotten, but people will move on to the next
yeah,
guy. It's going to be like, why am I putting my money in Tyler Herro when I could buy some Lamelo Ball as my lottery ticket?
yeah,
You know what I mean? So that's why I'm concerned. And you can call me a lot of things, but I am actually not biased. So even though I own a lot of this guy, I have to put him in C, not because I don't believe in him long term. I actually do. I think it goes to what
yeah,
you mentioned. That passing of the torch will happen, but I think it's going to be a slow one.
yeah,
So if you're asking for my personal strategy, I'm actually looking to sell a good amount of my Herro before the playoffs, because I think people are going to be like, oh, it's just going to be the same thing again. I better
hmm,
get in. And then after the playoffs, people are going to forget about him. And then that'd be the time to buy. So if this was purely a long-term list, like hold for 3 years, I think he would be a little higher for me. But factoring in where his prices are at right now and that short-term factor, he's got to stay in C for me.
that's fair. He just did himself a disservice by setting the bar so high as a rookie.
It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah,
Next one, another guy I actually own a good amount of, Michael Porter Jr. I thought, I don't know, we saw some flashes early in the year, but since then it's just been tough sledding for him.
yeah, it's been a weird year for him. I know he's another guy who had like COVID issues, and Denver has
Mhm.
just been kind of a weird team all year too. But the one thing I will say about him is Denver can't reach its potential to be like a contender unless Michael Porter is who we expect Michael Porter Jr. to be. So because he's not going to be the guy, that's Jokic. And I think we could sit here and argue about who's more talented between Porter and Murray, but I feel like right now Murray's better equipped to be consistently that guy in the postseason. But
Agreed.
still, if Denver wants to reach its peak, whatever that is, no pun intended with the Rocky Mountains, but Michael Porter Jr. has to be that guy. So if he can average 15, 17 points per game in the playoffs, then okay. But again, he set the bar kind of high with some big performances last year. So I don't know what that means for him in year 2, which is technically year 3, but year 2 because he didn't play his first year.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that I was about to bring up. I think people really forget that this is his second year. Like
Mm-hmm.
not technically it is. He didn't
Yeah,
play his first year, and then obviously at Missouri, like he's basically just, I mean, if you factor in how long he sat out, you could call him basically a rookie this season.
yeah, yeah,
So, and then the other thing to consider too is this is a big reach, and I understand that, but even a guy like Harden, right? Think about how long it took for him to get into that situation where he finally got to do what he does. And
yeah.
it's the same case with a lot of players. So I'm not calling Michael Porter Jr. James Harden, to be clear, but I think he is supremely talented, has such a special skill set that you don't see. But I feel like for it to be realized, especially with how Malone is treating him, I need to see him move out of Denver. That's my hesitation with him right now.
That's fair. And it's funny because like when people always talk about Denver making like a win now move, whether like it was back when it was Drew Holiday or like a Kyle Lowry trade or whatever, it's always like Michael Porter Jr. Like, maybe they'll be the young piece that they can get back a win now move. So, you never know. Like maybe it's a different situation, or maybe he just grows out of being where he is in that rotation or in the role he has.
Yeah, we'll see. This is tough because once again, this is short term versus long term. Short term, I'm not very bullish on Michael Porter Jr. Unfortunately, this season, even though I
Yeah.
own a lot of him.
Yeah.
I think once again, like Herro, you're going to see a big buying opportunity in the offseason. And because this list is buying at this exact moment in time, would I rather have Halliburton than him? Once again, all right, this isn't an exact science, but he's making it into B just because I can't have two of the biggest guys I own in C. So there's definitely an argument to have him in C, but just because of that, I think his even more than someone like Herro, just because of his size and everything, like his long-term potential is absolutely insane to me. So we'll put him in B, but that one's definitely up for debate. Okay, last three, starting off with Deandre Hunter. Quick question: Did I play against him? I feel like was because he went out as a sophomore, right? Or no?
He was I think he was a redshirt sophomore though, so he was there for 3 years. But he
because I remember his name. He was like,
he
he was like the scrappy, like almost off the bench guy.
Because I was
So
gonna say, like, that probably would have been like your senior year or something like that. Because that's how Virginia is. Like, it's like a guy's
yeah.
like they kind of work. They go from like averaging 1 point to 4 points to like 17 points, and I feel like he was the exact same. But as far as he goes, he's a big reason that the Hawks were playing well when they were playing well, and then when he went down, the Hawks didn't play as well. But what are we really saying here? It's the Hawks. Like, if it's not Trae Young or John Collins, and that's actually no bias, like, what are we really like? What are you really checking for with the Hawks? Just like, I think again, like, people don't realize how good of a year he was having because people don't give the Hawks their just due or their respect, and for whatever reason that is. So it's kind of hard to say anything other than that about him.
Well, also, and we'll take it back to the jersey thing. No one's buying a DeAndre Hunter jersey right now. And do you think anyone will ever buy a DeAndre Hunter jersey ever in their life?
Not outside of Charlottesville, Virginia.
No. So once again, a talented player, and I already know this is like one of those guys when you talk about him, and then our next guy, Keldon Johnson. There's a lot of people who have bought them because they're undervalued, and like you look at the price of him versus Lamelo Ball, it does seem absurd that he's so cheap. But once again, the long term, he'll be a solid NBA player, and I'm sure he can help some teams win. But that's all it is. And at this point, it might even be like an off the bench type player if you're really talking about it. Yep, go ahead.
I would say, no, get me wrong. I'm a big fan of DeAndre Hunter's game. Like, I watch some Hawks play because we check on JC and how they're playing, and solid defensively, and like he's made a huge leap from year 1 to year 2. But again, like you said, I don't think the common fan or the average fan or the casual fan is really like that in depth about it. Like, he's a basketball nerd's dream just as far as the things that he does, and he's a winning player. But again, a winning player in a situation that might not have much winning to do, so that makes it tough.
All right, well, someone had to lead it off down here. D for DeAndre Hunter. Next one, Keldon Johnson. This is a guy I was actually wrong about. I was telling people before the season, I was like, you know what? I just would not put my money into Keldon Johnson. This guy has played 8 NBA games in his career, and they actually kind of proved me wrong. He started off really strong. His prices went up a ton. But since then, he's cooled off and his prices have cooled off a ton, like losing. I think from his peak, he's probably at 60%. Or no, he's lost like 60% of his value from his peak. And that's the tough thing with these type of guys that I was trying to warn people on. It's tough. So, sorry, I guess that was I'm not sure exactly what relevance that had, but what do you think of Keldon Johnson?
All the relevance in the world. It's funny. I feel like you and I had a conversation before the year, and you like just asked me on the spot, like, who's a random player that I would think about. And I remember saying, Keldon Johnson, just throwing the name out there because I remember he had a good bubble. And again, San Antonio is just a franchise with a culture of winning. And like, I feel like they wouldn't draft you if they don't see something in you. And he's obviously shown enough of what they saw in him to get a Rising Star selection this year. But again, like, just all around, like, this is a team I feel like with him, the situation around him is going to affect him. All right. Like, the Spurs could very well be sellers at the trade deadline. And like, a lot of the reasons that they're successful right now and in the playoff picture, they might not be there anymore. Like, you got Patty Mills and DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge are all on expiring contracts. So the Spurs could just be a really young team by season's end. And it's Keldon Johnson, like, maybe getting up big numbers, but how successful is a team with this version of Keldon Johnson getting big numbers? So looking at it from that perspective, again, I'm a big fan of his game. And I think he's gonna develop really well in San Antonio. But what does that really mean, especially in the short term? Because if they don't end up being sellers, they're going to really rely on their older guys when they're trying to compete in the postseason. Rudy Gay as well is another older guy that they'll rely on, because if they go to the postseason, they're going to go to the postseason to win. They're not going to be doing it to develop players and get their young guys more minutes.
Yeah, here's the thing with guys like Keldon Johnson. As I mentioned, they are very cheap, but to me, they're like penny stocks. So that you can see a big swing upwards, but also, as we see, go look at the charts. They see a big swing downwards. And for me, those are not the waters I want to get involved in. Like, just think, I mean, you had a lot of great points, but think about how many like different scenarios we kind of just went through. It's like, is there going to be a trade? Are the Spurs going to make the playoffs? Is he going to get a role? Is he going to get a role somewhere else? Is he actually a premier scoring player? It's just so many different questions that, once again, this is our tier list and you are free to disagree with it, but it's just not the waters I'm looking to get in. And even just purely from like an opportunity's sake, this is just a huge hypothetical, but I've talked about someone like Dante DiVincenzo. Even though he's less talented than maybe someone like Michael Porter Jr., or even Tyler Herro, I'd make the argument. I'd put him higher because I think there's less questions. He's on the Bucks. They're going to be in the playoffs. They're going to be one of those teams, and he has not a premier role, but a solidified role on that team. There's less questions. So with Keldon Johnson, I don't know. I'm just not. I guess the point of that is I'm not looking to get involved there. Last one, maybe the best for last, another controversial one, Zion Williamson. I don't even know if I can ask you what you think about this guy because that deserves a 1 hour podcast. But I'll let you go for it anyways.
I'm going to start by saying I also assume that the prices on him are astronomical and through the roof.
They are, but he's lost maybe 40-50% of his value from his peak.
I know we talked about a little bit that with the All-Star chat. We did talk about it having gone down, but still being super high just because like it's one of those things where like obviously he's not LeBron, but it's that LeBron factor where like the bar was set so high that like he would have had to like win Rookie of the Year, MVP, and lead the Pelicans to a championship as a rookie to meet the amount of hype that he had surrounding him. So obviously I know the injury issues and the minutes restrictions and all those things impacted him negatively as a rookie. And then his second year, he just becomes like the best paint scorer in the league and is an all-star at 20 years old. So I think a big thing with him is obviously he's going to be the guy. New Orleans has a two-headed monster with he and Ingram. But the interesting thing about that this year is, again, are the Pelicans a playoff team? It seems like they get a huge statement win and then they have two losses where it's like playoff teams don't do that. And they're right on the outside looking in. They're going to be, in contention with teams like the Spurs and the Grizzlies, as the season winds down. But I'm curious to see how much he can dominate this year, the way he plays at 20. And will that be the reason they could win 12 out of 15 to make a run to get to the playoffs? Because I know when he gets to the playoffs, he just has a tendency to just do big things on the big stage. So I have no doubt that he can and will. But I wonder if this will be like history repeats itself. And, LeBron didn't make the playoffs for his third season. So maybe it takes 3 seasons for he and the Pelicans to do it too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things that go through my head with Zion. You have to, his price, like you mentioned, it's come down, but it's still very high just because that potential of what he could be has to be factored in. Yeah. He's unlike any player in the entire league with what he could be. He's been playing really well, like we talked about before. I think in the All-Star chat one, it's like, what did people expect him to do this year? Did they expect him to be playing like prime LeBron or something? Like there's only so much this guy can do. Yeah. But for me, that's tough. I'm chucking him an A because he can't be in B for me, but he also can't be an S because S means like I think this is like you really should buy in. I'm not in a huge rush to buy in on Zion, but just for the upside alone, how can he not be an A?
Right. I know we talked about that before with guys like, ultimately it's like one of those things, like it's going to hit because the way, because what you can expect from him, that in the long term he's a guy who will be in MVP discussions down the line. I can't confidently say he'll be an MVP one day, but he'll be in the discussions at the very least. So when I look at it that way, I think you still got to put him up there for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice and balanced.
Nice and balanced as all things should be. I think that's a nice looking tier list there. As always, feel free to leave your opinions down below. That's just what we thought. But Gil, thank you so much. I think that was good. That was fun going through it. I would say we're going to get to the team world, but I think this is really what the people wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you talk about them, it's like RJ Barrett and I feel like I'm forgetting somebody, but like RJ Barrett is important to have on there, and so Lou Dort is cool too.
Definitely. Well, thanks for coming on, Gil. Really appreciate it. That was good, and we'll have to come it up. I'll see if maybe the people down below, if you have any other tier list ideas you want to hear from a brilliant basketball mind over here, we'd be happy to do it.
I appreciate you having me, man. We can rank Raptors players or Canadians or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're not going to. That's the one I'm not going to do. All right. On that note, guys, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching. Peace.